Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special guest. Now, typically, we invite company CEOs, but given all the volatility due to Trump's Independence Day tariffs and the movement in markets, it's up, it's down, we thought there's no better man to have on board than Australia's former ambassador to America, Mr. Arthur Sinodinos. Arthur, how are you, mate?
Hey, John, great to see you as always.
Mate, always a pleasure to see you. So, Arthur, where do we begin? Obviously, we're gonna have to discuss the tariffs, right? What are now? I know they've just changed, but what are their implications to the Australian economy if they're fully implemented, in your opinion?
Well, there are two sets of implications. First, there's the tariffs between Australia and the US, which are going up across the board, up by about 10%, Australian product into the US. That's one set of impacts. Steel and aluminium tariffs subject to 25%. We don't sell that much steel and aluminium to the US per se. So the actual economic impact on Australia from the bilateral changes, it'll be there, but it will not be something that will really move the dial in a big way, if I can be very unscientific in how I talk about it, right? Relatively speaking, compared to the sort of tariffs that have been put on some other countries, when you look at what's happening with Canada and Mexico, 25% plus, the Chinese tariff, if it stays at 104% or whatever, they're big changes. The main impact that Australia has to worry about potentially is if there's a trade war around the world, if tariffs go up and stay up, if there's limited room for negotiation. The Trump team fall into two camps. There's a camp which sees the tariffs as a negotiating tool to get better trade and other outcomes from other countries. And then there's a second group who want higher tariffs and, where possible, as few exceptions as possible. And because they want the protective effect of tariffs, they want to encourage foreign direct investment into the US, particularly into manufacturing. Their focus is very much on goods rather than services. And the other thing that comes through is they want the revenue from tariffs. They want to count increased revenue from tariffs as an offset to some of their other spending that they're contemplating, particularly the tax cuts, which you'll recall were enacted in Trump 1.0. They expire at the end of this year. They need to be reauthorized. Trump is talking about even bigger tax cuts potentially. They have to be financed. That's where tariff revenue potentially comes in as well. So we've got a situation where the president needs to show progress in getting deals, good deals from other countries, but he can't afford a situation where it undermines the overall protective effect of what he's trying to do. The pause that you saw today in tariffs across the board and capping them at 10% for now, except for China, was because what the gyrations we saw in the financial markets that you've been following so closely the last few days, both in the stock market and in other financial markets. A lot of speculation about the extent to which the uncertainty will in itself breed into a slowdown. And in the US, there's no doubt that consumer sentiment has been falling. It may fall further as a result of what's been happening this week. So more talk in the US from people like Jamie Dimon and others about a potential recession. Goldman Sachs were putting this at 65%. They've pulled that back a bit in the light of the president's pause on tariffs today. But what we're talking about today is kicking the can down the road 90 days. We're not talking that we're out of the woods yet. The challenge here is what deals can he do over the next little while, which he can then trumpet as the success of the policy, and then we get something settled down. Because as much as anything, John, it's the uncertainty of where tariffs will finally land.
So, given that we've kicked the can down the road, has the market reaction, in your opinion, been extreme either way on the upside and the downside? Should we just sit back and wait?
I think it's because of the uncertainty as to where things will ultimately land and how much certain tariff levels will now stick. That's, I think, been behind the gyrations. I'm not surprised in the sense that they've been quite exaggerated compared to what we expected. And at the moment, there'll be a lot of people who want to go to the sidelines and sit on their hands and wait out the market reactions and see where tariffs ultimately land. You've got people like Warren Buffett sitting on the sidelines on a cash pile of about $334 billion, I think, from memory. So some of the big investors clearly are starting to think, well, okay, let's just see where things go. There was talk in the last few days about China selling treasury debt, treasury securities that they hold, U.S. treasury securities. We'll see how that goes on, but there's no doubt that China is taking retaliatory action. The Trump playbook is, if you retaliate, I escalate. The Chinese are testing that, and at the moment we've got a bit of a standoff between the Chinese and the Americans in this regard.
So the big question now for the market is, what will China do? Will they cave in or will they retaliate? How do you think the Chinese authorities will react to Trump? We know, they don't have proper elections, so they could potentially sit it out. What's your opinion? What will they do?
The longer this goes on as a standoff, the more each side will want to find a way out because they can't afford to have a standoff. I think the Chinese mentality would be, well, we don't want to cave. Certainly, we don't want to cave in too early. What do we need to do potentially to give Trump a win and then move on? But I don't know that at the moment they're minded to do this very quickly. And even at the end of the day, how much they're prepared to give away. They've been keeping their powder dry in terms of extra stimulus they might put into the system. So we'll have to wait and see. But the longer this goes on, the more the president, it's a bit like what's happening in Ukraine, where Putin is stringing the process out and Trump becomes more and more determined to get an outcome because he's running out of time as well. He can't afford the standoff. So we've got brinksmanship and no one can predict where this will end up. But there's no doubt the Chinese will push every lever they've got. They're stopping export of critical minerals where they dominate a lot of the supply chains. They've got all sorts of other stuff they can do.
Now, given your experience as ambassador, and you were there during Trump 1.0, what advice would you give the Prime Minister, the current ambassador, in managing the current Trump administration?
I think the best advice you can give at the moment is we've got an election in Australia, so it's probably better if we get the election out of the way, and then if Albanese is returned or Dutton becomes Prime Minister, one of the first orders of business, if not the first order of business, is to get on the plane, get to Washington, eyeball the president and work out, is there a deal that can be done here? Is there a deal around our critical minerals? What else is there that we can do? Because I think there is pressure in Australia for us to be seen to be doing something about this. And apart from the adjustment assistance the government is giving to affected sectors and the trade diversification strategy, I think people expect that the government will also go into bat about the tariffs because we're a major defense partner of the US in the Indo-Pacific. They run a trade surplus with us. So if you look at all the reasons why Trump is putting tariffs on other people, you could argue, well, we've been goodies on trade, not baddies. But of course, the reality is he put tariffs on us, not because he doesn't like Australians, but because he has a general policy of trying to increase the protection of the US economy and encourage people to invest into the US. And he wants investment from all over the world to come to the US. And so that's putting pressure on Australia as well in terms of our monetary and fiscal settings. It's putting pressure on how we potentially take action to attract or retain investment in Australia.
Now, you did mention the Australian election. We have seen over in Canada, which is a very similar country to Australia, the opposition Conservative Party being very popular, looking like a showing that they'll win their election. But now support over there for the Conservative Party has dramatically dropped. Do you feel a similar situation happening here in Australia? The fact that Peter Dutton's considered to be socially aligned with Trump, probably not the best person to be aligned with right now. Do you think that has a negative impact with his chances with in the upcoming election?
So there are two factors at work here. One is people who don't like Trump or Trump-like policies, and in Australia, that may well be a majority of people who would sort of respond to Labor's argument about Americanisation of the health system or all that sort of thing. The other factor at work is whether they think, well, is Albo or Dutton best placed to stand up to Trump? Now, Dutton has tried to make the point that he's no Trump. He has some related policies like on the government efficiency and all the rest of it, which has allowed Labor to try and link the two. But Dutton's a pragmatic conservative. He's not a Trumper. But the question is, will the electorate, first of all, when they go in the ballot box, rate leadership and who they think is best placed to stand up to Trump. And this is where Dutton would hope that his credentials as a strong leader who can take unpopular decisions will stand him in good stead. Or are they going to go for the view that we're going to cast a vote against Americanization of policies or importing Trumpian ideas into Australia, which is where either overtly or covertly the Labor Party campaign is going. And if that's the case, it could well be that that helps Labor in the election.
Now, lastly, Arthur, tell us about the Asia Group. You're a part of them now. What's your role? What's the Asia Group all about?
Well, the Asia Group was set up about 12 years ago by people who are ex-government officials and whatever to help American multinationals that were pivoting to Asia, to help them understand the policy and regulatory issues of Asian markets, the geopolitics of working in those markets. Since then, we're based in DC, and this is where I live and work, but we have offices throughout the region. And what we have is a mix of clients, American companies, Australian companies, companies from within the region who are looking at entering new markets in Asia, who are the local partners, who's who in the zoo in terms of strategic mapping of government engagement, what do you have to do to get things done in a particular market. So we're like strategy advisors. We're not lobbyists. We don't go into government and say, you've got to give a contract to X. So the people we've got now in the business are a mixture of industry experts, lawyers, bankers, ex-government officials who understand about diplomacy and international relations. For me, it was a good fit in the sense that having been involved in politics, having done economics and finance and worked in that field as well, as you know, and having done some diplomacy now, having been ambassador in the US, a lot of those sorts of skills were, I suppose, transferable to this sort of context. And so at the moment, we're spending a lot of time advising companies with an Asian presence what the trade and tariffs may mean for them. What does it mean, for example, about the location of activity in China vis-a-vis other markets in the region? There's a theory that if tariffs are going up all around the world, that will negate some of the impact on China, that some of the strategies that people have been putting up about hedging against China may now change, that there may not be that big a cost advantage now in moving out of China into other markets. And so in a funny way, will the tariffs reinforce the role of China in the international economic system as a center of manufacturing and processing of minerals and all the rest of it? And does this tariff strategy have the opposite effect of isolating the US a bit more? Even though, as you know, mate, the US is a huge economy. It can operate as a closed economy if it wants. That would be more costly, but they have a big market, internal market. They're like the EU. So they can sustain some of the trade restricting policies we're talking about now. But the challenge is for the rest of the world, countries like Australia, we rely on trade and investment. So anything which impedes global trade and investment causes a slowdown in that. That's going to have economic ramifications for us, particularly if there's a slowdown in China. You know the effects that has in terms of resource demand and other demand for Australian products and services out of China. So there's a lot to play for.
Arthur, thank you. I know you're a very busy man, and it was a very opportune time to speak to you, given your level of experience. Thank you again for your time, and we'll catch up soon when you're back in Sydney.
Always look forward to it, mate. Good on you.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.